New data shows more immigrants are leaving the U.S. The most recent figure comes as the Trump administration continues its hardline immigration stance.
President Trump's crime crackdown sweeping the nation. After deploying the National Guard to Washington, D.C., now the White House plans to extend its effort across 19 states.
New immigration data is sending shockwaves across the globe as the Trump administration tightens borders, ramps up deportations, and freezes work visas. The steady stream of migration into the United States has stalled. This isn't just a shift in demographics, it's a direct blow to economies that have long relied on the American dream as part of their survival. And now, with the doors closing, nations both near and far are feeling the consequences, from poor communities dependent on remittances to rising powers desperate for access to knowledge. No country feels the impact more immediately than Mexico. For decades, millions of Mexican workers have crossed the border to work in American farms, factories, and construction sites, sending money home to sustain entire towns.
My biggest number is 0. That is how many people the United States Border Patrol has released onto the street.
As deportations increase, that lifeline is cut, leaving villages in poverty and families with nothing to fall back on. The damage isn't just economic, it's the shattering of a dream within sight but now out of reach. That pain extends through Central America. Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador have long relied on remittances as their survival fund. In countless villages, dollars from relatives in the U.S. paid for food, medicine, and education. Now, with the U.S. shutting its gates, poverty rises, crime spreads, and unrest simmers across a region already on the brink.
Across the ocean, India suffers in a different way. Here, it isn't farmhands but intellectual capital that is at risk. For years, hundreds of thousands of engineers and programmers have depended on H-1B visas to gain entry into Silicon Valley. With restrictions tightening, those doors are closing fast. Each missed opportunity is not just a setback for individuals, it is a piece of India's technological future stolen by politics.
Today, the Trump administration reports it has revoked more than 6,000 student visas this year. The State Department says the visas were revoked because of overstays and criminal violations, including support for terrorism.
China faces a similar rupture. Its students once filled American universities, building bridges of science and diplomacy. Today, with student and research visas restricted, families lose faith and Beijing loses one of its strongest channels of soft power. The flow of knowledge is severed and U.S.-China tensions deepen further.
The Philippines feels the crisis in its pocketbooks. Millions of nurses, caregivers, and service workers in the U.S. send billions of dollars home each year. Those remittances make up a huge share of the national economy. Now, as migration freezes, households shrink their budgets and a fragile economy teeters under pressure. In Africa, Nigeria watches an entire generation of young people locked out of the American dream. Families who pin their hopes on one child making it abroad face crushing disappointment, while the country itself loses access to knowledge, innovation, and global networks. And even Canada, the prosperous neighbor, cannot escape the shock. Temporary workers, exchange students, and dual citizens who once moved freely across the border are suddenly stuck in limbo. Universities, tech companies, and industries on both sides of the 49th parallel are rattled by the disruption of labor and talent. From Mexico to Central America, from India to the Philippines, from Nigeria to China, even up to Canada, the message is the same. When America closes its doors, the price is counted not only in dollars, but in broken trust and shattered opportunities. Immigration policy is no longer just a domestic issue for the United States. It has become a geopolitical weapon reshaping the global balance. Mexico loses its workers, Central America its lifeline, India its talent, the Philippines its income, China its knowledge, Nigeria its future, and Canada its vital connections. The world once looked to America with hope, now it watches with doubt. And if the American dream becomes a nightmare for millions of families across the planet, the U.S. won't just lose workers, students, or innovation, it will lose something far more precious: trust. And when that trust collapses, the failure is not only economic, it is a diplomatic failure that will define an entire generation.
We need to get rid of the regulations that are taking 15 years to get critical minerals out of the ground. And we can be an economic powerhouse around the world. We have to unleash Canada.
Canada is entering one of its most turbulent political and economic chapters in decades. Outside its borders, Washington is tightening tariffs, using 25% steel and aluminum duties as leverage to force Ottawa into concessions in ongoing trade negotiations. August 1st looms as a critical deadline. Without a deal, Canada faces a slow-burning trade war that could cost billions. Inside its borders, the pressure is no less severe. Premiers from resource-rich provinces such as Alberta, Ontario, and Saskatchewan are openly expressing frustration with Ottawa's slow, over-regulated approach, warning that Canada is falling behind while opportunities slip away.
Canada's premiers are set to start meeting tomorrow in Ontario's cottage country, a three-day gathering that'll include Prime Minister Carney. Topping the agenda, trade, tariffs, and protecting the economy amid Donald Trump's most recent tariff ultimatum.
Prime Minister Mark Carney is confronting an uncomfortable truth. U.S. tariffs are here to stay unless Canada makes major trade concessions. 25% duties on steel and aluminum are already crippling industries. Ontario, Canada's manufacturing engine, imports most of its steel I-beams, but now pays a double tariff, 25% to bring them in, 25% when products cross back south. The result? Billions in losses for construction projects and skyrocketing costs for beer and soda manufacturers dependent on aluminum. Washington is not backing down. Advisors close to Ontario's premier have warned bluntly, if there's no deal by August 1st, Canada enters a new tariff era. Ontario's premier, typically moderate, is now openly pushing for a tougher stance. He's urging provinces to buy Canadian-made cars, steel, and industrial equipment, arguing it's the best way to hit back at the U.S. economy. We are America's #1 customer. We buy more U.S. goods than Japan, China, Korea, the UK, and France combined. They need us more than we need them. But Ottawa's approach remains cautious, favoring negotiation over confrontation, creating a growing rift between federal and provincial strategies.
Prime Minister Mark Carney about the state of trade talks with U.S. President Donald Trump. This meeting was to be taking place during the week that Canada and the U.S. were finalizing a new trade deal, as Carney and Trump had agreed to during the G7 summit.
While Carney talks about national unity, Western premiers are moving ahead on their own. Danielle Smith, Alberta, has blasted Ottawa for wasting decades and hundreds of billions by blocking energy pipelines and over-regulating natural resource projects. Alberta is now quietly negotiating direct energy deals with the U.S., effectively bypassing federal oversight. Scott Moe, Saskatchewan, echoes Smith, demanding streamlined mining regulations, pointing out that it currently takes 15 years to get critical minerals out of the ground. Even Doug Ford, Ontario, who often supports Ottawa, has shifted. We need to unleash Canadian industry or we'll be left behind. This isn't just rhetoric. It signals a growing provincial bloc willing to take independent action, undermining Ottawa's claim of a united Canada. Premiers are also outmaneuvering Ottawa by building real economic partnerships with Indigenous communities. Alberta has committed $3 billion in equity stakes and millions for training and scholarships to secure Indigenous support for energy projects. Ontario is following suit, calling this a golden opportunity for genuine reconciliation.
Alberta independence is the elephant in this room.
Do you support Alberta exiting Canadian Confederation and becoming a sovereign nation?
Well, the Premier insists this panel isn't about separation, but some say it is about giving separatists in her party a chance to be heard.
While Ottawa still talks about reconciliation for political points, provinces are offering real ownership and shared profits, flipping decades of mistrust into collaboration. Canada is now squeezed from two sides. Externally, U.S. tariffs threaten to cripple industries and force Ottawa into concessions. Internally, provinces no longer trust the federal government to protect their interests and are building parallel economic strategies. If Ottawa doesn't find a way to reconcile these tensions, Canada risks becoming a patchwork of provinces, each pursuing its own trade and energy policies, weakening its leverage with Washington. Prime Minister Mark Carney insists Canada is united and stronger than ever, but the reality is slipping out of his hands. Premiers aren't waiting. Washington isn't softening, and ordinary Canadians are already paying the price in higher costs and threatened jobs. The question is no longer, how long can Canada hold out, but rather, can Ottawa change course fast enough to restore confidence at home before the U.S. forces Canada into a weaker bargaining position?
The U.S. marks its latest trade deal, this time with the European Union.
This doesn't portend well, very well for Canada.
It's the tariffs that Canada has put on goods coming in from the U.S. that are hurting hurting the people in Alberta the most.
There is no longer a country called Canada, only a lonely nation named Ottawa. This phrase, once dismissed as political theater, now echoes with unsettling truth. As global powers like Japan and the European Union race ahead with new trade pacts with the United States, Canada finds itself dangerously isolated. Worse still, the unrest is no longer limited to average citizens. The country's own premiers, the pillars of federal unity, are now openly clashing with Ottawa. What we're witnessing is not just a political rift, it's the slow unraveling of a nation's core.
Unfortunately, for Canadians, the stakes are far too high. The affordability crisis is very real. We are in a vulnerable position.
At the latest meeting of Canada's premiers, frustration boiled over. Ontario's premier didn't hold back, declaring, "We buy more U.S. products than Japan, China, the UK, and France combined. We're their #1 customer, and we shouldn't have to beg for respect." Alberta's voice was even sharper. While Ottawa waits for negotiations, we lose billions in exports and jobs. Quebec joined the chorus, blasting federal inaction as not just weak, but dangerous. These are not isolated complaints. This is a coordinated message from Canada's provinces. Enough is enough. The trust is gone. Ottawa is standing alone. While Canada waits, the U.S. has already finalized deals with Japan and the EU, both securing major tariff reductions, especially in auto exports.
I think it's the biggest deal ever made. Thank you very much.
The baseline 15% tariff rate granted to them stands in stark contrast to the looming 35% Canada now faces on key exports if no deal is reached by August 1st. President Trump, speaking bluntly, said, "We haven't had a lot of luck with Canada. Maybe there's no negotiation. Maybe it's just a tariff." For a country once seen as America's closest economic partner, that's not just a warning, it's a public demotion. In Windsor, auto plants are reducing shifts. In St. Catharines and Oshawa, supply chain delays are stacking up. Small manufacturers say they're already absorbing losses from steel and aluminum tariffs. Farmers in Saskatchewan, exporters in Quebec, they all report rising costs, dropping confidence, and fewer trade routes. For the past decade, Canadian businesses thrived under predictable NAFTA-era terms.
That's what the MOU is about today, is how can we find a way to support each other, and then in addition to that, find a way to get to new markets.
Today, they operate under a fog of uncertainty, while Ottawa urges patience that industries can no longer afford. Confidence is collapsing, investment is drying up, and workers are paying the price. Across social media, a wave of frustration is swelling. Buy Canadian slogans have turned into sarcastic hashtags. People ask, buy what? The shelves are empty or overpriced. Consumers feel trapped, paying more for less with no leadership in sight.
Premier Smith and Premier Moe said, we have to be leaders in the G7 when it comes to our economy, and we need to unleash every tool in our Canadian toolbox and tell the world that Canada is open for business.
Many accuse Ottawa of chasing the illusion of a perfect deal while letting real opportunities vanish. Even staunch federalists now echo provincial sentiments that Ottawa no longer understands or serves the everyday Canadian. The anger isn't just about trade, it's about identity and a feeling that the country is slipping away from its people. Canada is at a crossroads. While Ottawa still clings to the belief that the right deal will come, the provinces are moving on. Premiers are no longer asking politely, they are demanding autonomy, demanding action. The longer Ottawa waits, the deeper the rift grows. What remains is not just a gap in policy, but a canyon in trust. And if this trajectory continues, what we'll be left with is not a nation, but a lonely capital called Ottawa, surrounded by provinces already charting their own course toward a different future.
Overseas now, and the European Union thought it had a trade deal with the US. That's until further concessions were requested from the White House last week.
Just weeks ago, the United States and the European Union were closing in on a deal. After months of back and forth, both sides had converged around a 10% tariff ceiling, a modest but significant breakthrough. Then came the reversal. President Trump raised the ask. First 15%, then 30%. It wasn't a counteroffer, it was a reset. Suddenly, the finish line moved out of reach, and the EU saw it not as negotiation but coercion. What had been a pathway to de-escalation became a roadblock to agreement. In response, the European Commission began assembling one of its largest retaliation packages in decades. According to Politico and the Wall Street Journal, the bloc is preparing up to 72 billion euros in counter-tariffs. Targets include luxury American goods, beef, soybeans, cars, aircraft parts, and cloud computing infrastructure, industries that cut deep into politically sensitive regions of the U.S. Beyond tariffs, the EU is poised to use its anti-coercion instrument, enabling non-tariff penalties, restricting American firms from public contracts, reviewing cross-border investments, and suspending shared technical certifications. The retaliation is not just economic. It's legal, systemic, and meant to deter future strong-arming.
We are facing the most significant crisis of our lifetimes because of President Trump's unjustified tariffs and his threats.
Up north, Canada is mobilizing too. In Muskoka, Prime Minister Mark Carney has gathered all provincial premiers for an emergency summit, an extraordinary move that underscores the severity of the threat. There are two tracks. First, to pursue a narrow, sector-specific deal before the August 1st deadline. Second, to brace for the fallout if Trump moves ahead with his 35% tariff threat on goods outside USMCA protection. Unlike the EU, Canada has already acted